If you're building AI automations and you're still trying to manage data in Google Sheets, or worse, manually updating things across 5 different tools, you're making your life way harder than it needs to be. Airtable is the backbone of almost every automation system that I build, and today I'm going to show you exactly how to use it. I help builders and freelancers land high-ticket clients and retainers consistently, and Airtable is one of those tools that shows up in almost every single client project. If you want to learn how to put your skills to work and actually land that first or next AI automation client, join my free school community and go through my free 4-week challenge. The link's in the description. Now let's dive in. Okay, so what is Airtable and why do I think it's better than Google Sheets? So you can think of it as a relational database disguised as a spreadsheet, meaning things that are within the database can have relationships with each other. And why it's better than Google Sheets, in my opinion? Because of the ability to have structured data, relationships between tables, better API support, and you can literally use it for everything. CRM systems, content calendars, project tracking, lead management, or just like as the glue that connects together workflows within N8N. You can kind of think of it as like a repository for where all your data will go in case you want to keep logs or records of that data. So if you don't already have an Airtable account, it's free to start. Just go to airtable.com and create an account. So once you're here on the homepage, I have a whole bunch of different bases already set up, but we're going to be creating a new one. So your base, you can kind of, like I think of bases as like apps. So you're kind of building an app, or at least the infrastructure for an app. And so to create your base, you're going to click on the create button right here, and you can build with Omni, which is Airtable's built-in AI feature. I feel like it's good in some ways. It still needs tweaking in other ways, but we're going to be building an app of our own. So we're going to start with a blank one. Okay, so you can see Omni pop up on the left-hand side here. And like I said, Omni can be super helpful. One use case that I find Omni really helpful for actually is, let's say you're creating like a database and it has like 20 different headers, like name, email, address, phone number, favorite color, favorite food, whatever. Rather than coming in here and right-clicking and then inserting field to the right and then picking which field that you want and doing all that, what you can do is go to Claude and say, hey, Claude, this is my data. This is how it's structured. Like you could just take a screenshot of it, or if Claude has been helping you to build a workflow as you go, then you can say, hey, Claude, I need to set up Airtable now. Can you give me a JSON object that represents the data that we're needing to input into Airtable? Claude will come back with the JSON object, and then you can just come in here to Omni and chat and say, hey, Omni, I need you to create a table for me using this format, and then just paste the JSON in there. And it will go through the trouble of, going through and creating like name, email, phone number, all of those fields that we just talked about. And it's a huge time saver. And it will also know, and because Claude is very smart and knows how Airtable needs to receive data, especially if you're using Opus 4.5, which at the time that I'm recording this is the bomb, but it's going to instruct Airtable on the exact types of fields. And so we're going to get into different types of fields in just a second, but just know that that's a shortcut for you. Okay, so now that we have created our base, I'm going to go ahead and close this sidebar to get rid of Omni. So I'm going to double click on this untitled base and we're going to name it. So I'm going to call it Airtable Demo. I'm going to make it this fuchsia color, I guess. And now this is like the default table that pops up whenever you create a new base and table. So a table, you probably recognize like this format. This looks a lot like Google Sheets. Obviously, it's a lot more robust, but you can think of a table as like a worksheet in Google Sheets. And then you can think of your base as like the workbook. So your base can hold multiple tables within it. But I'm going to go ahead and delete all of these for now. So if I just right click on the header and scroll down to delete, then I can get rid of them. And now we're just left with this column, which is called name. Now, if I double click on this, you can see that it's set up as single line text. So that just lets Airtable know what kind of data is going to go in each cell in that column. So there's a lot of different options to choose from. I can't remember the exact number of characters that Airtable can hold in long text, but I think I've used it for like up to an hour and a half or 2 hour YouTube transcript. So it's a lot. Then we have date, phone number, email, URL, number, currency, percent, duration, a formula, which is dope, auto number. So that's just if you wanted to assign a number to a list of items or a list of records, and then a barcode. And I've actually never used barcode before. So let's say I actually want to change this column to date. Now I have a bunch of different options. So I can just use my own local date format. If you wanted to change it, you could change it to multiple different formats. Like if you're in Europe, you can also toggle these buttons on. So if you want to include the time, you can choose between 12 and 24 hours. And I can also toggle on display time zone as well. But I'm going to cancel that. And just for now, we're going to leave it as name. Okay, so you know what a base is. You know what a table is. Let's go ahead and rename this table. We'll call it test items. And now these are records. So right now, these are all blank. I'm going to go ahead and delete these. So highlight them or check the boxes, right click and click delete all selected items. So now I'm just going to add in here my name, so Lindsay. And now this, that I have this box checked by it, this is a record. Now if I click this plus button, I want to add Bob. Now I have 2 records, one for Lindsay, one for Bob. So these are individual records, and then this is an individual field within the name column. So these cells are called fields within the column, and these are records. Okay, so we already talked about single line text. Next, I want to talk about long text. So the cool thing about that is you can enable rich text formatting. And if I open up this little dialog, you can see some shortcuts for adding like bold, italics, links, etc. right inside of that field. So let's say I create this new field called notes and I have rich text formatting enabled. If I go ahead and create that and double click into this box, now I have this little button that pops up and I can choose all different kinds of formatting. So headers, quotes, indentation, bullet lists, etc. So if I type here is a list, this could be a checklist of thing 1, thing 2, and thing 3. And then like I said, we have number, currency, and percent. So those are those 3 right in here. And I feel like those are pretty self-explanatory. One thing I want to point out about numbers is that like if you're formatting numbers, it's going to automatically default to 1.0. So oftentimes that won't make sense. And so you'll want to turn this off and you can just change it to 0. So it's just going to be the nearest whole number. All right, next we have single select and multiple select. So single select, just like the name implies, means you can only select one item from a list. So if I add an option, I could say apples, oranges, and bananas, which are nasty. Sorry for all you banana lovers. But if I click create field, now if I click on this, I have to select either between apples or oranges or bananas. I can't select multiple. So I'm going to go ahead and select apples. And if I try to click in here again, it's going to force me to just pick one. And then for multiple select, it's the same thing, except I can choose multiple of them. So in this case, salad, steak, and burgers. And if I wanted to select my favorites, I can add multiple. So I can pick salad and steak and burgers. We've already talked about date, but something else that I want to show you that's really cool is created by and created time. So let's say I wanted to know when this record was actually created. So I can select created time, and then it's going to default to local. So I'm just going to name this field created time. I'm going to leave it set to local time and including time and click create. Okay, so now it shows you that I created this on 12/9 at 1:03 p.m. And similarly, if I want to see who created it, so let's say I have me, but also 5 different collaborators on this base, I can actually see who created that. So if I click created by, I'll name this field created by, and now you can see it was created by me. So this is really cool if you have multiple users on your system and each person is making updates. Maybe it's like an inventory system or a CRM or something like that. But it's just a cool feature to be able to know who created this record. So this is also something really cool and really handy. But I can also look up the last modified time. So last modified by, just the same exact thing as created by, but it's whoever last changed this record. But if I create the last modified time, what's cool about this is I can select between all editable fields or specific fields, meaning any field that's available to be edited. So that could be name, notes, items, favorites, etc. I can see who changed anything in any of those fields, or if I just want it to look at only a specific field, then I can select the specific field that I want it to look at. Okay, so let's just say that I wanted to know the last time that the notes were updated. Like maybe this is a CRM, and every time somebody has a follow-up conversation with a prospective client, they need to update the notes. So I can watch that notes field, and then I can get a sense of, okay, when was the last time this person was spoken to, and when were the last time that the notes were updated. Okay, so my table is starting to get really full. I'm going to hide some of these fields. So hiding fields is not going to delete them. It just gets them out of the view in your table so you don't have to look at them. It doesn't mean the data goes away, and it's still available if we're doing something in N8N or building an interface, which we're going to talk about in just a sec, but it just gets it out of this view that we're currently looking at the raw data within the table. So I'm going to go ahead and right click and scroll down to hide field. I'm going to do that for a couple of these just to get them out of the way. Okay, the next thing that's really cool is a checkbox. And I'm going to show you more of why that's really cool in just a sec, but we're going to go ahead and click checkbox. We're just going to call it checkbox. There's a bunch of different styles that you can choose from. I'm just going to leave it as the default. And so the only options is binary. It's either checked or it's not checked. So yes or no. And like I said, this is going to come into play when we're getting into interfaces and scripts. So you definitely want to stick around because it's really freaking cool. All right, a couple more things that I want to point out are URL, which we've already talked about. URL is very basic. You could say this is like a website for a client or a company, and then say it's google.com or something. And now it's a clickable link. And if I click it, Google opens up. There's also a field for email, which I'm not going to show you because it's pretty easy, but it makes sure that it's, something at blank.com or .ai or whatever the case is, but it's going to follow that structure. And there's also a field in here for phone number. So we'll just call this number. And now if I try to enter a number, so let's say 559-555-1234, it's going to automatically format it like this. And the one thing I do want to warn you about is if you're sending any kind of like SMS marketing or doing any kind of making calls with like an outbound voice agent, I would not use this field. And the reason for that is obviously it's going to format it with the parentheses and then the hyphen right here and spaces. And typically when you're sending SMS or doing outbound, it wants it as +1 or plus the country code, then the area code, and then the phone number. So just be cognizant of this. This is making it pretty for humans to look at, but when you're doing it for like sending JSON to N8N or sending JSON to, a webhook or another platform, you'll want it in a different format. Okay, so I'm going to hide that. Okay, one last thing I want to show you is a formula. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to insert a new column to the left. And this time we're going to select formula. I'm going to name this first name. I use this fairly frequently. Right now I'm just going to leave it to name and click create. So you can see I have a formula. The formula is just name, which is the name of this column right here. So that means that this first name column is just going to be whatever is in that name column for that record. So obviously that's not very fun. But where this comes in really handy is, let's say you have some kind of form, like a web form or, something that a user is submitting to a business, and it asks them for their full name. So Lindsay Gonzalez is my full name, almost typed my maiden name. But the cool thing about this is, let's say I want just the first name. So I'm going to go over to Claude and I'm going to say, please give me an Airtable formula to derive first name from name. The name data looks something like this. Okay, so I'm asking Claude, please give me an Airtable formula to derive first name from name. And I'm putting these in caps and quotes to indicate those are the names of the fields in Airtable because that's going to be relevant to our formula. So the name data looks something like this. I'm going to send that off to Claude, and then Claude is going to return back a formula that I can just copy and paste into my formula in Airtable. So basically this formula is saying for name, basically find where there's a space and then only take the first part of that. So we're going to copy that, come back over to the first name formula, and I will paste that formula in and click save. So now it's going to take whatever is in this name column, and it's only going to parse out that first name based on that formula. Obviously, that's not the most robust formula out there, but I think you get the idea. Okay, so now I filled out Bob's record a little bit, and now I want to talk to you about how to create a view. You can create new views over here on the left-hand side, and views are just new ways to look at the same data. So for example, if I right-click here, I can add it to my favorites, so it'll show up at the top. I can rename it, or I can click duplicate view. So I'm going to click duplicate. Okay, so we're going to name this Orange Lovers. So right now I just created that new view and nothing has changed, and that's because we haven't done anything different with this view. But what I want to do is filter the data. So now I can add a condition where items is not, is any of, none of, empty, or not empty, but I'm going to say is oranges. And so now you can see the Lindsay Gonzalez record dropped off and only Bob Smith remained because he likes oranges, or he's an orange lover. But this is a really cool way. Like, let's say you're building a CRM and you want to know who the hottest leads are. So you could have like the hottest leads right here, scored 9 or 10. You can have medium heat leads that are scored like 5 and, between 5 and 8. and then cold leads, which are leads that are scored below that. But that way, it's really easy for you to kind of flip between those views and know who you want to be looking at for the day if it is a CRM, versus having to come back to a really long, potentially, list of names in the grid view and manipulate it directly here. Now, coming back to the grid view, I can also sort this. So I can sort it by name, first name, any of these different fields that I have. I can also group it. So let's say I have a single line text field that this is assigned to a specific user. So these two records are assigned to Tom, and this one is assigned to Andy. So if I wanted to group these, I could group them by who they're assigned to. And so now it's just like a really easy way to see who all Andy has to follow up with, who all Tom has to follow up with, etc. And then within there, if I wanted to sort, let's say I wanted to sort by name, then I could do that. And now we have an alphabetized list of names for each person that has an assigned, lead in the CRM. And coming back here to Orange Lovers, I use filtered views all of the time in N8N automations. It's just a lot easier to filter the view in here, then be able to refer to it in N8N, then try to manipulate the data in N8N once it's received in its entirety over there. So it's just a lot easier oftentimes to do some of the stuff up front in Airtable. And we'll talk about more of what you could do natively in Airtable in just a second. Now I want to introduce you to one of the coolest features that I think Airtable has, and that's interfaces. So if I come up here to the top, I'm going to right click and open this in a new tab. I always like to do it like that because then I can still refer back to the data that I have, like the raw data, but now I can also build a beautiful interface that can be client facing. Okay, so you could try building with AI. I'm just going to build it myself. You can build an interface or a form. So a form would be like, think of like a form in N8N or any other kind of web form or type form, something like that. But basically you determine what the user needs to input, and then that data gets stored in a database or a table in Airtable. But we're going to be building an interface right now. We'll call this test interface. You could, select a nice icon. We'll have that little truck thing. Go to next. Now we get to choose a layout, and this is really cool because you can kind of preview what each interface will look like. So you can choose a list, which is basically going to be like a simplified version of what's in your database. You can have a gallery. So if you have something that's really image heavy, then you can be able to view all of the images and the associated data for each image. You can organize records into columns with a Kanban style interface. So this is really good for like project management. It's very much like Trello if you've ever used that. Calendar, so if you have like due dates or publish dates or that kind of a thing, this is really great for like content calendars. Timeline, which is kind of like a Gantt chart, but you can see what the time frames are for certain projects or certain tasks to be completed. You can choose a custom interface extension, which I never use. You can create a form, so you're actually creating new records. You can create a dashboard, which is like one of the most common ones that I've used. Overview, so highlighting important pages and resources. So you can kind of think of this like, how people like to set up like FAQs and stuff like that in Notion. It's very much like that. Or a record review. So you'll have all of your records on the left-hand side, and then you can select a record, and then it will pop up like this so that you can see it with greater detail. Or you can start with one that's completely blank. I almost always use list, dashboard, or record review. But like I said, these are great for like client-facing portals or team dashboards for like status updates or project management, project tracking. Approval workflows. I'm actually building a content creation workflow for a client right now that the user interacts via an interface, and they click a button that says generate outline or generate script, and then that sends data to N8N via JSON payload that hits a webhook in N8N. And then that kicks off this entire flow that generates an outline for a video or a script for a video based on all these different inputs. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and select list for this one and click next. Now it's going to ask us which table we want to use for this particular interface. I'm just going to leave it on test items. Now, if we had multiple different tables within our base, then it would show all of those different tables here. But since we only have one, we're limited. And go ahead and click finish. Now I could go so in depth with Airtable interfaces, but it would be seriously like a 3-hour long video. So I'm just going to keep it basic. And maybe if you're interested, I will do a longer video about interfaces in the future. For right now, I just want to show you the basics of how to edit your interface. I have my title, which is test items. I can click over here and change the name. You can kind of see like the blue highlight where if I click on a different part of the table, it will highlight different things. So this blue line that goes around everything is kind of indicating what we're manipulating. So when it's all the way around everything, it's kind of like if you've ever used like some kind of like visual web builder where you're dragging and dropping in like WordPress or any kind of web design. This is like the element that's selected. And so we're editing this element. You can kind of think of it like that. So this, we are making edits or changes to the entire table. Now I can click in here. I can change this name to like, let's say I wanted to name it client name, first name, notes, whatever. Now, if I want to get rid of one of these fields, so let's say I don't care about the first name, I just want their full name. So I can just select this, and now you can see it's highlighted with blue around it. I can click here and I can just hide that field. And the reason why it's hiding it, not deleting it, is because to delete it would actually be to delete the data from like the raw data in the Airtable table. So that's why we're not going to do that. We're just going to hide it from the view. Because remember, this is just a view into the data. And then similarly, if I wanted to add a field into the view, I could just click this plus button. And let's say I want to know who it's assigned to. Then I can just select any of these headers right here if I want to change their names. And then I can click here. And now it's asking me, do you want to allow users to open record details? If you say yes, now it's going to open up and look something like this. And then within this record details, I can still edit things. So I don't want the first name. I don't really care about that. So I'm just going to highlight that and click remove. I'm going to leave checkbox. I don't care who created it. So I'm going to remove this as well. Again, it's just removing it from the view. It's not deleting the actual data from our Airtable base. And if I want to move this, I can just kind of drag and drop it like that. So I want to have the checkbox say above assigned to. Now you'll see because that checkbox is not editable, it's not showing up right here. So if I want to make any of these fields editable, all I have to do is click the field that I want to edit, not just the name. I don't want the blue, the blue line around just this part. I want it around this whole entire field. Once I've selected that, I can come over here on the right and you can see I have checkbox selected. But I want to click on this to give permissions so that it is editable. Now I can check that box, uncheck it, versus before when it was view only, checking didn't do anything. So we'll make that editable. Then to publish these changes, I would just click this publish button here. It's going to ask if I want to share this with existing users, which I don't. So I'm going to click no. And then this is what the client will see. So if I click out of that, this is what the client's going to have access to. It's, pretty simple, pretty straightforward. It's a lot cleaner looking than this data in here, right? And a bonus, you can choose which fields are editable. And so clients can't come in here or other users aren't going to come in here and be able to mess things up. If the only thing that they're able to edit, so they can't click on any of these other things, is this checkbox, then we know that data is safe and we don't have to worry about anything getting accidentally changed by the client because they're in there doing crazy stuff. Okay, now this is going to take me right into built-in native automations within Airtable. So I'm going to come back over to a data table. I'm going to click on automation. So I'm going to right click and open a new tab. And I always like to keep my actual table separate from my interface, separate from my automations, rather than having to hit the back button and so on and so forth. Just a personal preference of mine. So if you are familiar with N8N, this should be a piece of cake to you. Only thing that's slightly different is that you kind of have to get used to the way that Airtable talks about records, what this interface looks like versus what you're probably used to with N8N. But you should be very familiar with what a trigger is. So you can say when a record matches a specific condition, which we're going to be using in just a sec, or when a form is submitted, or when a record is created or updated or enters a certain view or at a scheduled time. So a lot of these are very similar to what's already in N8N. And so this kind of should be a little bit familiar to you. And you can also see we have integrations for Google Calendar, Google Forms, so on and so forth. And there's way more integrations than that, and I'll show you in just a sec. For right now, we want to add our trigger as a record matches conditions. Okay, real quick, I'll double click on this and just name this test automation. Okay, and then we can kind of just go on the far right-hand side and just go top to bottom. So we're selecting our table. It's going to come from the table we've been working in this whole time, which is test items. Then we're going to add the condition. So what is it, what's the condition that's going to be present in a record that's going to trigger this automation within Airtable? So I want to make it when checkbox is checked. you're starting to put together how this could be really dope. I'm going to go ahead and select, I can either select use suggested record, just go back to our raw data and make sure we have a box checked. Doesn't look like we do, so I'm going to go ahead and check the box for Lindsay Gonzalez. So when the checkbox is checked, and then let's go ahead and use the suggested record from Airtable. Okay, so we can see it ran the, you can kind of think of it as clicking the little play icon in N8N and having that node run. So it said step successful. And this is the record that it found. So the Lindsay Gonzalez record, the one that I just went and checked the box, that came through. So perfect. Everything's working A-okay so far. Now we can add an action. So that's what we want to happen now that that box is checked. So again, very similar to N8N. I can do advanced stuff like conditional logic or repeating group. We're not going to get into that right now. All of this stuff right here is stuff that should sound fairly familiar. So send an email, create a record, update a record, find records, sort, and generate with AI, which I'm not going to get into right now. But what I really want to turn you on to is running a script. Okay, so I just clicked run script. This is like one of the dopest things about Airtable. I can't even tell you. So really quickly, I want to go over to N8N. I created Airtable test. And I'm going to add a webhook listener. It's going to be a post request. I'm going to call it Airtable test. And now I'm going to grab the production URL. I'm going to go ahead and flip that to active. Right. And now we need to add our script in here. I'm going to come over to Claude. Okay, so I'm telling Claude, can you please write me an Airtable script for base Airtable demo, which is the name of our base, and table test items, which is the name of our table, that whenever a records checkbox field is checked, it sends the below data to this webhook. And then I pasted my webhook from N8N. And I want to send name. What else do we have in there? Say, send name, notes, and assigned to. You can include whatever information that you want, but this is just what I'm specifying to Claude for right now. So we will send that off to Claude. Okay, so it came up with our script, and then we'll just need in the input configuration to add record ID and map it to the record ID from the trigger. So first things first, let's grab our script over to our automation where we're editing our script. We're just going to paste over this. Okay, and then like Claude said, we need to add an input variable. Just make sure. So it's just called record ID in camel case. So record ID. And the value, we're going to dynamically map it. Whenever you see this like blue plus button, we are dynamically mapping it just like you would dynamically map something in N8N rather than hard coding the data in. So when a record matches specific conditions, i.e. the checkbox is checked, then we're going to grab the Airtable record ID from right here. That is our input variable. Okay, let's go ahead and click on test. We do have our webhook active and ready to go. Okay, so then my console log shows that it was successfully sent to the webhook. Let's come over to N8N and make sure that it was sent. And indeed it was. Let's just verify that we have all three of the fields that we wanted to send in our webhook. We do. We have name, notes, and assigned to. So that's awesome. Go ahead and copy that to the editor and just save it for now. You can close out of Claude. Okay, and now that we've tested this successfully, we can just exit out of there. So now, whenever that box is checked, it's going to automatically, once I turn this on, going to automatically send the name, the notes, and who it's assigned to in JSON payload over to that N8N webhook. So what's really dope about this is imagine you have a workflow built in N8N and you want it to receive information automatically, like as immediate as possible from Airtable. Like whenever a change happens, send it over to N8N. So if you're building something with an Airtable trigger on a new trigger event, you're going to have to set it to every minute, right? And that's going to be expensive when it comes to execution. So if you're executing something 60 minutes a day, 24 hours a day, that's 1,440 executions on that one workflow. And if there's no data coming through from Airtable, just by virtue of running this trigger to check, you're using 1,414 executions. So do that. Use a script in Airtable to send it via webhook. If you are using an Airtable trigger, you don't have to do it every minute. You can do it every hour. Like if you actually want something to happen only once an hour or once a day or that kind of a thing. But if you want to get that data, that same data over in real time, now you know how to generate a script. And now if I come back over to my test interface, So let's say I'm the client or, messing around with my interface and I come in here to Betty Boop. I want to check the checkbox. And now because I have that automation turned on and live, come back over to N8N and check my executions. You'll see that second JSON payload came through, and this one's for Betty Boop. Here we go. Oh, you can just see how powerful this is, how flexible. Like, it just saves you so much money on executions. Instead of having to run 1,440 executions in a day to capture 3 different, potential checkboxes happening over here in Airtable, it just is going to be a huge time saver, be way more efficient, and possibly save you some money over in N8N. So, like I mentioned, Airtable is free until you reach 1,000 records per base. Now, 1,000 records, kind of a lot, but if you're running something where you have multiple thousands of clients, or you're using this as a CRM, or, something where you have more than that, plan that I pay for on Airtable is like $25 a month. One thing I will warn you against, this is like the one downside, is if you want to have other collaborators on your Airtable, you have to invite them as a collaborator to that base. And then it's an additional $24 a month or $25, whatever it is. You're operating as a solo AI automation consultant. I mean, hopefully you've seen just how powerful Airtable is and why you should use it over a platform like Google Sheets or just doing stuff manually. Like the sky's the limit when it comes to Airtable. So now you know how to create bases and tables, use the right field types for your data, create views and interfaces, build native Airtable automations, and even send instant data to webhooks using scripts. Now, if you want to learn how to put these skills to work and actually land your first AI automation client, join my free school community and go through the free 4-week challenge. The link is down in the description. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.